Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, and pleased to be joined by a name familiar to all college basketball fans, Andy Katz. You watched him this year on March Madness coverage. You see him on the Big Ten Network. You also see him, I think, on FS1. Andy, welcome to Podcast on the Brink. Happy to be talking to you today.
Thank you, Alex. Hope all is well this spring.
Obviously, it's been an eventful offseason for Indiana basketball. You, with your work with Big Ten Network, are intimately familiar with all the Big Ten programs. I guess, how surprised were you this spring when Indiana decided to make a move to get rid of Archie Miller and bring in Mike Woodson?
Not surprised. I guess the only thing I was surprised about in the current climate was that they were going to come up with the money to buy out Archie. That $10 million figure. That was the only surprising thing. In general, buying a guy out when things weren't going well, no. I was there in Indianapolis. I heard the boos. I heard the fire Archie. So you had to know that things were not going well with the staff or him and the fan base. So, it was a bit of an untenable situation. And so if the right booster or, financier was available, I had a feeling that Dolson was going to find a way to get it done. And so he did. There was obviously a lot of names being bandied about. We're now seeing this trend of going with an alum with an NBA tie. Maybe you could argue younger than Mike Woodson, but still, this is the one thing they haven't done, for the most part since Bob Knight, is to go back. But I think he's the right, I'd say right now he's the right person at the right time, because you needed someone, if you were going to do that had the current NBA ties, which he does. And he's got great respect, as we saw when he went back to MSG, with the Knick players, giving him a jersey. I mean, he's very well respected within the NBA community. And let's be honest, that's exactly what today's players want. Not that they didn't want it before, but they really want it now. And so I think it was, it appears to be a great hire. And I would say that so far he's doing all the right things. Getting TJD, Trace Jackson Davis, to come back was an absolute home run. He could end up being the Big Ten Player of the Year. Certainly could be in the preseason. And then, we could go down the list of, guys that have either recommitted or them signed, or even within the staff of getting Dane Fife down from Michigan State. It just feels like each move, was done correctly so far.
You've been covering college basketball for a long time, and Indiana's struggles are not necessarily a recent thing. This has kind of been an ongoing thing since really 2002 was the last time they made, the national championship game. I'm curious, just from your perspective and covering the sport as intimately as you do, why do you think it's been so long for Indiana to have consistent success?
Well, first of all, that was a championship run team that was not expected.
Right.
Let's remember that upset of Duke was not expected. They ended up getting a break in the Elite Eight by playing Kent State after knocking off Duke in the Sweet 16. I can't remember who the other team that should have been there instead of Kent State.
Yeah.
Still. So all credit to Mike Davis. Dane Fife was on that team. Coverdale. For them to get to the championship game and play Maryland was a great accomplishment. But it wasn't like, things were rocky around that time anyway.
Right, exactly.
So it was a little surprising. But I also would say that we can't dismiss, Crean, well, he didn't get further than, a Sweet 16. The year he had Oladipo and Zeller, yes, they should have gone further, but they had talent. They had the moments. Obviously, we'll never forget the Christian Watford shot to beat Kentucky. That'll go down forever in terms of Indiana lore. So there were moments. And, the way the Kelvin Sampson era ended, obviously, was a disaster in terms of the penalties, and so that they came out of that. It's hard to pinpoint why Archie didn't work, but it just didn't. They recruited well. I thought they played hard in spurts. There were times where their effort just wasn't there, which was odd to see. So I can't put my finger on why it wasn't able to translate from what he could do at Dayton to Indiana, because it's not like it should be, jumping way up in a weight class. I know the Big Ten versus the A-10, but Dayton's had great success as a program. So, we'll see. I mean, obviously, I think college basketball and the Big Ten need Indiana to be good, to have Assembly Hall rocking. I think it's just healthy for the sport when that happens.
So you talked a little bit about what Woodson's done so far, but I'm curious just for your thoughts on the roster so far, what he's been able to bring in and how those pieces are going to help. Xavier Johnson coming in from Pittsburgh, Miller Kopp, obviously the transfer from Northwestern, has a lot of Big Ten familiarity already. Michael Durr, a transfer coming in from South Florida. And then he's also added who I believe is now a 5-star recruit in Tamar Bates. Do you think just kind of those pieces as a collection are going to be able to help this team compete and be a factor next year in the Big Ten?
Yes. I think it's also relative to the Big Ten losing a fair amount. But I do think, let's take Miller Kopp, for example. From my vantage point of covering him, watching him, he's not a number one guy, and that's okay. Not everyone is a number one, and that's not a slight. I think he will benefit with all the attention being on Trace Jackson Davis. There was a lot of attention on Miller Kopp at Northwestern. He's not a player that can create his own shot, really. I mean, so if everything collapses on TJD and he's open on the wing, bam, that's what he's there for. And I think he can flourish in that role. And I think psychologically, mentally, he will be less stressed. I'm not in his body. I'm not there on a daily basis, just my own vantage point from 30,000 feet. If it's not all on his shoulders. And so I think he will benefit. I love the way that TJD has now sort of taken this on. Like, I got to get to the tournament. He embraced, obviously, what Mike Woodson wants to do. So, because that's not the norm. He easily could just go and be an NBA draft pick. Xavier Johnson bouncing now from Pitt, the transfer from South Florida. These guys are looking for sort of a new lease, playing in a better league. ACC may not want to hear that, but I do think it is. Obviously, I'm a little biased in that sense. And with Bates, obviously, we'll see if he can meet this rise in the recruiting. But then getting Christian Lander, to come back, and obviously having now a chance to flourish under a new head coach. I do think that these pieces on paper should fit better. We'll see if it all materializes in that manner.
When you look at just Indiana's team last season, from talking to Dane Fife when he did his introductory press conference with the media, he said that he viewed it as enough talent to be a tournament team. Did you see it that way? And kind of with what they had last year, do you feel like that was a team that could have been better had some maybe things gone their way, or guys were maybe used differently?
Yeah, I don't know if I would go to guys using differently, but what was shocking was their swings. I mean, there were some times when you just question, like, where's the effort? Because the talent is not meeting the effort right now. And then there were a couple games. What was it? Home Northwestern.
That was early in the Big Ten season.
Yeah, lost that one.
Lost to Rutgers at home in a game that they really needed to win. Yep. And then lost the last six.
I thought they were going to be in the tournament for a long time. Indiana fans know that I was higher on Indiana than maybe their record at the time. And so, yeah, they had tournament potential. I think they should have been a tournament team. and they're basically a game or two away from really being in the tournament.
So looking at I've got your Big Ten power rankings, which I'm sure you get a lot of engagement on and a lot of love letters from Big Ten fans. So I'm sure Indiana fans are probably pleased to see where you have them right now at 5th. But, you've got Maryland at number 1, if I'm looking at your most recent, Michigan 2nd, Purdue 3rd, Ohio State 4th. Maryland at 1, what do you like about them going into next season, and how important is it that I believe they still have a couple guys in the draft process at this point. So is that contingent on, I guess, everybody coming back?
Yes. So it's interesting. When we do this for obviously for engagement, but and everyone has their own rhyme or reason. For me, I'm speculating and obviously informed opinion, if you will. I just can't see a scenario where Darryl Morsell, Aaron Wiggins, and Eric Ayel all stay in the draft. And Morsell, I think, was also in the portal. But
yes.
I can't see that scenario. They're not first-round draft picks. So you take now those 3 coming back, and then you add in Fats Russell, who I love from Rhode Island. So he's an experienced guard. And then you add Qudus Wahab, who, helped Georgetown win the Big East tournament. I think this Maryland team, while it may not be as talented as 2 years ago, I think will be maybe as experienced as 2 years ago. And as we've seen in the Big Ten, experience matters. And I think they could end up potentially having the most experience atop the Big Ten. And so that's why I leaned in that direction. Michigan may be one of the most talented teams, but losing Wagner, I think is a hit. We already knew they were losing livers, and losing Wagner is a hit. Let's see how all the freshmen pan out, obviously. Ohio State, I certainly could move up. And, I'm just not convinced yet that E.J. Liddell is coming back. But if he does, with Dwayne Washington, if he comes back, those 2 guys, with Kyle Young returning, who I thought was sensational last season, and the additions of Joey Brunk, Indiana fans know him, if he's healthy, and then Jamari Wheeler from Penn State is a huge plus. The team that I think, certainly could win the league that Indiana fans know very well is Purdue. If Purdue gets Travion Williams back, they've essentially got pretty much their whole team back, and they could be primed for what we see with Matt Painter, which is, developing. Guys are ready to take the baton and go, and I certainly could see that from this group.
The other thing with Michigan is not just Livers and Wagner, but losing Mike Smith and Sean D. Brown. I think those are 2 notable losses as well. How do you kind of, all these programs, Michigan kind of falls in this category now of getting a lot of these, I don't want to say one and done, but they're going after a different caliber of player than they were after John Beilein. It almost feels like, they're recruiting with the Dukes and the Kentuckys of the world. And we've seen kind of uneven performances for those programs when they bring in all these 5-star guys and try to mesh them into a new team. With the Michigan situation specifically, they have this obviously highly acclaimed recruiting class, but when you're projecting ahead to next season, what are you looking at just in terms of their roster that you like, and what do you have questions about?
Well, I mean, they got the transfer from Coastal Carolina, which obviously would be a huge plus. As a Sun
Belt Player of the Year.
Yeah, Sun Belt Player of the Year. Thank you. Wait, Sun Belt or Big South? God, I'm trying to blank here.
I think it's Sun Belt.
Anyway, he'll be a huge plus. They're hoping he replicates what Mike Smith did from Columbia, and that was more of a surprise. No one expected that. And by the way, it's funny how all the criticism of one and done, and now we're getting another way, sort of the other one and dones on the back end of their careers, where you're just getting a guy for 1 year and the fans will say, oh, well, we barely get to know this player. Well, so it's working at both ends, the freshmen that are elite and the seniors / super seniors, the post-grad kind of guy. But yeah, I mean, I think that Michigan, I think this will continue under Juwan Howard, which is they're always going to have the Brandon Johns, now the Eli Brooks, that third, fourth year guy, that's going to be like that glue guy for them. That's going to be that stable presence. So that I don't think will change going forward with their program.
With Mike Woodson, I want to get back to him for a minute because I know you've talked to him and interacted with him some. What do you think is going to be the biggest adjustment from him going from the NBA to college? Because you don't see a lot of guys coming from the NBA to college. You see college guys go to the NBA, but it's obviously a new system. And also I wanted to ask you just kind of what you think of the infrastructure that Indiana's put around him, having Thad Matta, having Dane Fife, having Kenya Hunter, Yasir Roseman. These are all guys that have worked in the college game. It kind of seems like they're really giving him the resources that he may need to be successful right from the get-go.
No, I would say not seems. They definitely are. I'll be really fascinated to see how this Thad Matta role develops as a sort of in-house consultant. It's groundbreaking. I mean, you don't really see this. I mean, there aren't as many people that, maybe that becomes a new trend and former coaches look for a way to just sort of do this to get back in the game without being fully back in. And I think that'll be interesting to track that. To me, it's always about the recruiting rules aspect, which, by the way, is changing, obviously, with NIL coming. All of that's going to change for everybody, not just a guy coming from the NBA. But it's the recruiting aspect. That's what consistently, and that's why I never believed Brad Stevens would come back or Billy Donovan will come back because they're just basketball coaches now, which is fine, but they don't have to deal with all the other stuff. And they don't have to go to booster events. We'll see how much of this stuff comes back. The rubber chicken events. I don't know if those things will come back or not, but you don't have to go to them if you're in the NBA. And that external aspect of your job is very limited. If you're an NBA coach, you're there to coach this team. And I think that extra stuff and recruiting will be, the biggest transition for Mike.
When you look at the transfer portal and how it's changing college basketball right now, do you view it as a positive for the game, or do you view it as kind of something that it was kind of made necessary by this whole movement for more player empowerment and guys having an opportunity to maybe move about like they didn't have before?
I think this is, let me say this, Alex. The high numbers now is the perfect storm of COVID. The super seniors, the fact that everyone has this extra year, I think that's what's created, even more players looking for a new destination. And so that's number one. I think ultimately, and also the one-time transfer rule, it's going to tighten up on the double transfers. So I think that will bring that, and no COVID, obviously, hopefully, will bring everything further down. We'll still see a fair amount, but it has changed recruiting dramatically in terms of, filling spots. But I will say another thing that's helped is because coaches aren't going out on the road yet, that'll happen in June and July, having the transfer portal has been a huge advantage in recruiting because you can actually see the player, because you've seen them play. Whereas a lot of these high school kids in the classes of 21 or 22 or 23, you maybe weren't able to get out on the road and see them, or there might not be video or enough video. So with the transfers playing Division I, they at least were able to see that, over the last year or two.
I've seen some suggestions on Twitter, like obviously people quoting anonymous coaches saying that they're going to focus more on the portal moving forward than high school players. Do you believe that that's going to be the case in some instances? And do you think that's a sustainable way to build a program if programs do go that route?
I can't see it as your main objective. I can see filling holes in the short term. That I can see. I can't see it as like a way to build. I think it's a way to supplement. your program. But yeah, I can't see it as I think it's always going to be here, at least in the for the next few years for sure. But I don't think it's your team probably is not going to be 8 guys. Maybe is it 2 to 3, 2 to 4? That's probably the highest.
I'm curious, just from your perspective, this past season, you've been around this game so much, and you've covered so many Final Fours. You've covered, everything there is. You've been to all these venues. How often did you go out to games this year? And if you did, what was it like? And just how much are you excited? How excited are you to get back to a more normal college basketball season next year?
So I was fortunate. I was able. I got to more than I thought I would, but only because I was working. So I never obviously went to a game. In my past, I would go to a game, if it was in the area but I had to have a specific purpose. So I went to the Mohegan Sun, and so I was in that bubble. Then I did a game for Westwood One at Wisconsin. I did a game at UConn for Westwood One. And so that was my only regular season. Oh, excuse me. No, I did a couple of games for Fox at Providence. So that allowed me to get in there because there's no fans and no other media, by the way. So I was only there because I was actually broadcasting, either radio or television. So there was not even any print media or internet media. So that was my only way in. So I was fortunate in that aspect. And then obviously Big Ten tournament and then the Final Four, because during the first 4 rounds, I was in Atlanta at Turner. So so at least I got to some. But yeah, I can't wait. And seeing just in these other sports, fans coming back. Look, this, Alex, you grew up around it. There's I would put college basketball fandom against any other sport in terms of its importance. It completely changes the dynamic at Cameron Indoor Stadium. We saw that this year. Obviously, Duke wasn't as good, but they weren't as bad as their record at home. And that's because they didn't have any fans. There's no question in my mind that it makes a massive difference at Duke. How many points is it worth? Is it 4 points, 5, 6? There's no question that it's a huge advantage when they have fans.
Makes a difference at Indiana too, I'd say. They're one of the better home court advantages. I want to be respectful of your time and get you out of here on this, but just in terms of college basketball storylines entering next season, obviously we're going to start seeing as we get closer to the NBA draft, we're going to have rosters more finalized and we're going to know what each team has coming in. What are some of the storylines that you're most interested to see shake out over these next couple weeks? And who are some teams, maybe 3 or 4 teams that you think kind of going into next season are contenders to win the national championship?
Well, certainly, UCLA, if Johnny Juzang comes back, Gonzaga won't be as good, but as a title team, but they're going to be top 5, top 10. Could they win it? Sure, they could. They played in the championship game. Villanova, with their experience returning, in the Big Ten, like I said, I think there's whether or not they have a title team. I don't know that yet. They're going to have great depth. And in the Big Ten, I mentioned Ohio State. What happens with those 2 guys? What happens at Illinois? Because Kofi Cockburn still has not said if he's staying in for sure. That's a huge decision we're waiting on. In the Big 12, I think once again, similar to the Big 10, a lot of depth. I don't know if there's a title team in the Big 12. So, still all shaken out. As we sort of see where these rosters all land. Kentucky's obviously reloading. Alabama and Arkansas will be really good again. So will Auburn in the SEC. Virginia, and we'll see how good this class is at Duke. Storyline, want to see Hubert Davis at North Carolina, obviously. First time since it would have been 03, right? 03?
Yeah. Because they won in 05. So
Yeah. So a lot of those storylines as well.
What else do you have on tap for the summer, just in terms of your work with the NCAA? I see you're involved with obviously a lot of different webinars and different hosting different things. What do you, obviously you're covering college basketball year round, but what else have you been doing kind of this off season?
Well, yeah, so it's doing stuff for the Big Ten Network. It is obviously our weekly social series with the NCAA, various issues that pop up. So we've been doing that every week, every Friday night. Our podcast, March Madness 365, and then I'll be doing the NBA draft for NBA TV. So, which is later, as we all know, it's July 29th, usually third week in June. So we'll be doing that as well.
Well, Andy, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I know Indiana fans are going to be excited to listen to this episode. Thanks so much for joining me, and have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Be well.